So good morning. I'm Rachel Bevan, Director of Statistics Division here at ESCAP. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event and to moderate this really important session. But let me also say a big welcome to those online. I can see we've got 50 people joined online, including one of our panel members, but then we've also got people in the room as well. So huge welcome to everyone who's able to join us today. Because we're kind of doing a hybrid session as well, can I just remind everyone who's online to keep your microphones muted unless, of course, you're speaking. Please also note we are going to record the session. We'll make it available afterwards, and we will also share it with the Secretariat of the High-Level Expert Group on Beyond GDP, just so you know that we're doing that. So for decades, gross domestic product has been the main way to measure national progress, yet we know it really falls short in capturing what truly matters. And there's been growing awareness of many of the kind of gaps in terms of what GDP is measuring, and that sparked what was called a global call to value what counts. And in response to that, the UN Secretary General established an independent high-level expert group in May 2025 to propose actionable country-owned measures beyond GDP. So in this session today, we're exploring emerging pathways beyond GDP, and this is very much a part of the global consultation series for the UN high-level expert group on beyond GDP. And it's an opportunity for us all to really rethink about how we measure progress in ways that really reflect people's well-being and sustainability. So we're honoured to have three distinguished speakers, as well as all our fantastic participants. And what we're going to do throughout this session, so we've got around 2 hours, but what we're going to do is we will start with some opening remarks from Lin Yang, our Deputy Executive Secretary for Programs at ESCAP. So thank you. And after that, we're really delighted to have a member of the high-level expert group joining us today. So we have online Dr. Pamkan Nam, and he's the Rector of the College of Economics, Law and Government, and Associate Professor at the University of Economics, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And as a member of that high-level expert group, he's going to share some findings and recommendations from their initial report. So following the opening remarks and that presentation, we're then coming back to the room, and I'm delighted to welcome Philip Schellekens, who's the Chief Economist for Asia and Pacific at UNDP, and he'll be sharing his kind of reflections and a presentation as well. So that takes us to maybe the first part of the event, but most of the time that we're going to spend today is really on an interactive dialogue, because this is really a chance for everyone to shape the global conversation, and we really do want to hear from everyone, as do the high-level expert group. So we're going to be using Mentimeter throughout this session. We've got a code on the screen. We put it on the tables in the room, but we couldn't do that for the online people. But hopefully you should be able to see it on screen. There's also a code. Maybe we need to close that. We just need to close the dialog box so we can actually see the code. But there's a QR code. And just to say that from the Mentimeter, we've taken the questions that we're using from the global consultation questions. And we will be collating the information. Well, obviously we're using it in the dialogue today, but we'll be sharing the results back to the Secretariat of the high-level expert group, but they will be shared anonymously, just to be very clear on that as well. As you're filling it in, feel free to say exactly what you think. So we're just going to check that the Mentimeter is working. We've got lots of people, I think, who are joining. If we can just go to the first question on the Mentimeter as well, and you can still see the code at the top. What we wanted to do, just as we're listening to the opening remarks, people can start reflecting on what does progress mean to you and what indicates that your life is improving. We're looking for fairly short responses, not essays for this particular one, but please do go ahead and fill those in. And now I'm going to pass over to DES Lynn, who's going to share some opening remarks. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel, for this very good welcome remarks, and also for moderating today's session. And also very good morning, and dear participants. I noticed that online we have over 50, right? 50 participants. Right now, maybe reached 60 because the number is too small. I can't read it. 62. Yeah, 62. We have 62 participants online. Very warm welcome to you, and also very warm welcome to Dr. Nam, our high-level panel member appointed by the Secretary General. In the room, we have Philip, the Chief Economist of UNDP Asia Pacific Regional Office. And today we meet and to discuss a very, very important topic. I have to share that this week is our committee, the 5th committee on macroeconomic policy, poverty reduction, and the financing for development. This is our intergovernmental platform to discuss the subject topics. And also we have our director and from the macroeconomic policy and the financing division here, Mr. Hamza Malik. So the reason I mention this committee is that it's indeed also a platform and offering us a good opportunity to engage member states and different stakeholders to discuss such an important topic. I can share quickly a few takeaways and from the committee discussion where we are right now as a region. So there were strong messages saying that our region is still quite outperforming, right? Our region is one of the most diverse and the dynamic parts of our world. Maybe I pause a little while and so that we can look at the results and then I can resume. I think it's very interesting and fun. Yeah. Rachel, you would like to, share with us because those, words are too small for me. I couldn't really read them. Maybe Ricky or Rachel, you can read. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can see about happiness comes up there several times, doesn't it? Health, positive outlook, ability to live in peace and security. But maybe we can hide that for a minute as you're speaking, and then we can come back to that and see what other views we get. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, it's a really very interactive session. I think I can already tell at the very outset. So let me go back to what we learned from the committee session. So our region is still quite doing a quite good job overall. And the number one is that our region is a very, very diverse and dynamic parts of the world. We are home to nearly 4.8 billion people, 60% of the humanity, while also contributing almost 60% of the world GDP. So our region spans vast geographies, cultures, economies, and the stages of development. This diversity is not a challenge, it's our greatest strength. It gives us a wealth of experiences, innovation, and the solution to draw upon as we tackle shared challenges ahead. This is the first message. Our diversity is our strength. Second message is that our region stands as a crossroad. And yesterday, our colleagues presented in two sessions to the member states the key finding from our flagship report, Macroeconomic and the Social Survey. So the slowing economic growth, rising debt, weakening productivity gains, and the limited fiscal space, those four challenges are straining and the development. And at the same time, inequality persists, leaving millions without access to basic services. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution threatens ecosystem and the livelihoods, and the geopolitical tensions make cooperation harder and more urgent than ever. So why we need to discuss the beyond GDP in this context, because for decades, progress has been measured primarily by GDP. But the GDP alone cannot tell us if growth is inclusive, sustainable, or improving lives. So when the Asia Pacific is at the crossroads, we heard a lot and many times that member states saying that we need to look at a new development paradigm shift. So what is this development, the new paradigm shift? What is, will be the core component? How we are going to, in this round of paradigm shift, really put people at the center? Those are the questions also can be discussed and addressed in the overall picture of the Beyond GDP. So where we stand, and let me share some SDG progress numbers. In 2024, developing economies in Asia and the Pacific grew by an average of 4.8%, outpacing most regions. That is why I see our region is still quite outperforming. Yet the growth was uneven and inequality persistent. And our progress towards the SDG reflects a mixed picture. We had advanced on industry, innovation, infrastructure, Goal 9. This is going to be reviewed next year in our regional forum. Health, Goal 3, and the poverty reduction, Goal 1. But environmental indicators such as sustainable fishery, land degradation show regression, slowing progress on life below water, Goal 14, and the life on land, Goal 15. So countries across Asia and the Pacific are pioneering their own national approaches to measuring well-being and the sustainability. I can give a few examples of those national approaches and exercise. The Bhutan Gross National Happiness Framework includes 9 domains and 33 indicators. New Zealand's Living Standard Framework captures individual and collective well-being across environmental, cultural, human, financial, and social dimensions. The Philippines is developing a quality of life index rooted in long-term aspirations, including material and non-material aspects, such as culture, family, and subjective well-being. At ESCAP, we have been supporting the sharing of these experiences, which remind us that while global alignments matters, regional and national context is just as important. Progress must reflect cultural values, community priorities, and national aspirations. So today we will hear from Dr. Nam and also Philip and the 2 speakers, panelists in the room, and their views and insights. But more importantly, we want to hear from the participants, both in person and the online participants. This consultation is part of a global process that will shape how we measure progress, not just today, but for the future. So your voices representing Asia Pacific voices are critical to ensuring this work is legitimate, inclusive, and intellectually rigorous. As we look forward, we need to do 3 things. First, we must redefine progress to include equity, sustainability, and well-being, not just economic growth. As we look ahead to the future of the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that priorities may evolve, but the core challenges remain. Poverty, inequality, education, and health will continue to demand our attention. New and emerging trends like climate change, digital transformation, demographic shift will only demand more attention. So this makes the picture very, very complex. Our task is not just to manage those challenges, but to measure them and more effectively, understand them more deeply, and respond with the solutions that are inclusive and sustainable. Asia the Pacific region is a region of immense diversity and the potential, as I mentioned at the very first beginning. To unlock this potential, need global indexes and the metrics that can help us to see the big picture and can guide the policy making in a more data-driven, science-based approach. But this must complement, not replace, national approaches that reflect local realities and the policy needs. Second, we need to continue to strengthen statistical systems to support better measurement and the decision making. To do this, we must continue strengthening statistical capacity across the region, foster peer learning and experience sharing. We must implement new frameworks like the system of the National Accounts 2025 that is discussed in the Statistical Commission, and the system of the environmental. Sorry, someone is speaking. Can you mute your microphone? Yeah, and in also the system of environmental economic accounting, what we usually call the SEEA, which help us move beyond GDP and capture the full picture of the development. What I mean to say is that in the whole exercise of the beyond GDP, we really need to build on the existing processes, existing work, existing mechanisms. We can harness the synergy. And finally, we must ensure that data is not only produced, but it is used. For data to drive meaningful change, countries must take ownership of the measures they adopt. We need a whole of society approach, which is highly commended and agreed upon in our last committee, where policymakers are empowered to act on evidence and where communities, especially at the local level, understand and engage with the metrics that shaped their lives. And for the individuals and for how they can understand, interpret those metrics is very, very important. Today, we can build a future where progress is measured not only by economic outputs, but by the quality of life, the health of the planet, and the strength of our society. To end my opening remarks, I would like to quote our Secretary General. He said, citizens should no longer be told that the metrics for the success of their society can be expressed in a single number. We need a visionary proposal for how to conceptualize a dignified and a good life today and tomorrow. I thank you for your attention. I really look forward to a very, very interactive session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, DS Lynn. Maybe if we can just go back to our Mentimeter before I hand over to Dr. Nam to actually tell us more about the work of the high-level expert group. If we can just perhaps go down, we're seeing, actually it's interesting, I'm seeing a lot of words of happiness is up there, a lot, happy, health, positive, access to services, better health, stability. And we saw already, didn't we, peace and security. So yeah, there's certainly like commonality. And I think we'll hear more about lots of those different things actually in terms of hearing about what exactly this new framework is. So at that point, if it's okay, I'm going to now hand over to Dr. Nam, who I said is a member of the high-level expert group, and he can tell us more about the work of that group and about the interim report. And just to say, if you're in the room, I did leave a few copies of that interim report actually around for you to have a look at. We've also got a link on the flyer so you can, go in, have a look. And if you're in the room actually as well, if you don't mind filling in the registration form, we're not going to try and attribute anything, but it's just that we were feeding back to our colleagues in New York, kind of roughly how many people were here, and just so that they know as well, because they couldn't be with us today. But over to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nam.
Good morning. Can you share my slide? Or Okay, it's here. Yes. Good morning, distinguished delegates and colleagues. It is a great honor to join you today to present the emerging recommendation of the United States High-Level Expert Group on Beyond GDP. So today I would like to walk you through the key elements of our work, but also open a space for our dialogue, especially from the Asia Pacific region, as Ms. Lin Zhang just mentioned. Your perspectives will directly shape the final recommendation we deliver to the General Assembly in 2026. Let me begin with the mandate. Next slide, please. You know, Action 53 of the Pact for the Future gives us a clear and very ambitious task, that is to develop a framework of measure of progress on sustainable development that complement and go beyond GDP. So actually, GDP has served the world well for nearly a century, but it was never designed to measure, as you see, the richness of human well-being, or the distribution of opportunities, or the health of our environment. And our member states recognize that a more balanced and integrated framework is needed. The one that captures economic, social, environmental dimension of sustainable development. So they asked the Secretary General to establish the expert group, and our work will lead into the UN-led intergovernmental process starting in 2026. So it means the work we are doing is not academic. It is meant to shape global measurement standards. Next slide, please. Here you see the members of the high-level experts group. We come from diverse backgrounds: economics, statistics, public policy, sociology, development, and also well-being research. This diversity is essential because, you know, our problem, the problem that we are tackling require thinking across disciplines and also across regions of the world. Next slide, please. So today I'll walk through the same structure that you see in this slide, our mandate and background, why the world needs this agenda, the goals of measuring what matters, our three-part framework, conceptual framework, our proposed domains, the relationship between GDP and beyond GDP, and finally, how we move from metrics to real policy impact. I will also end with some of the key questions that the high-level expert group is still debating, where we really welcome your insights. Next slide, please. You know, our mandate is to develop a limited set of universally applicable country-owned indicators reflecting the multidimensional nature of sustainable development. So this is important. Not hundreds of indicators, a small, powerful, communicable set from 15 to 20 indicators. We build on existing national and international frameworks, but we are also introducing new thinking, especially on agency, on equity, on sustainability and resilience too. Next slide, please. A quote from Amartya Sen captures the spirit of our work. Human lives are battered and diminished in all kinds of different ways. And the first task is to acknowledge that these deprivations must be seen within one overarching framework. And GDP captures only one type of deprivation. That people experience so much more: poor health, lack of security, environmental degradation, inequality, exclusion, the erosion of trust in society, and also decline.
We'll just leave it 1 second. It looks like our screen's frozen. That's the technical issues when you haven't got people in the room. We'll just try and leave it maybe another minute or so to see if he comes back. If not, we will have to be very agile and work out what we do. We're just checking if he's still online or what's happened. Okay, so we think it's...
Oh,
Okay, you're back. Sorry, we lost you there for a bit, but we
back.
think it's back now. Sorry, we just lost you at the end of the quote, I think, from Amartya Sen.
Yeah, sorry, something wrong from my side. The internet is not so stable. Yeah, so actually, the framework for the 21st century has to account for our multiple dimensions that I just mentioned. Can you go to the next slide, please? The goals that you see here summarize what we aim to achieve, what we want indicators that reflect the current material well-being more accurately than income alone. We want indicators that go beyond income to capture well-being and quality of life. The indicators that go beyond average, because disparities matter. The indicators that go beyond today by integrating sustainability and intergenerational fairness, equity, and account for the cross-border externalities which are essential in a globalized world. So this is not just a statistical exercise. It's all about redefining what success looks like for societies. And many of us in the Mentimeter show that. Next slide, please. So to structure this work, we use a three-part framework with 3 pillars for well-being, equity, and inclusion, and sustainability. These pillars are interconnected. Well-being without equity is fragile. Equity without sustainability is short lives, and sustainability without well-being is meaningless. So this symbol structure helps us organize indicators in a way that is intuitive and globally relevant. Next, please. So within the well-being pillar, the high-level expert group proposed 7 domains: material well-being, education, health, subjective well-being, social capital, governance, and environmental quality. These domains, you see, reflect more than 10 years of global research, including the OECD framework, national well-being dashboards, the academic literature, and country practices. So this structure actually is flexible enough for diverse member states, but also rigorous enough to guide a global dashboard. Next, please. Now, let's be very clear that we are not replacing GDP. GDP tells us something very important, the level of economic activity, but it cannot tell us if people are thriving, if inequality is widening, or if we are undermining our natural system that support our life. And beyond GDP means complementing GDP with measures that fill these gaps. So GDP will remain for sure and should remain, I think, part of our measurement system. But our group is also exploring complementary metrics, such as you see here, what we call valued GDP, which removes spending that does not contribute to well-being, or equitable GDP, which adjusts for inequality, and sustainable GDP, which incorporates environmental externalities, adjusting the standard measure of GDP to better capture sustainability. These indicators are exploratory ideas. We intended to spark debate on this one. So, however, our main output will still be the focus set of beyond GDP indicators, not a replacement of GDP index we are currently use. Next, please. And the indicators we propose only matter if they influence decisions of policymakers and of household of people. So this is why the high-level expert group also thinking about how these indicators can support policy making, how governments can institutionalize them, how budgets and planning can be informed by well-being, equity, and sustainability, and how we build statistical capacity so countries can collect, can analyze, and can use these indicators. Next, please. And you see that countries like New Zealand, Italy, and Scotland already use the Beyond GDP frameworks in budgeting, and we want to help more countries to get there. So, before I end my keynote here, we have key tasks that we are still working through. The first one is that finalizing domains, selecting indicators. The third one is that addressing measurement challenges. And we also want to ensure influence and uptake. So these are exactly where we hope regional consultation like this one will guide us for this challenge. So next. So this is my final slide. So thank you for your time and your engagement. So today's consultation is a very critical step in ensuring that the Beyond GDP framework is universal, meaningful, and grounded in real priorities of member states, especially reflecting our Asia-Pacific region perspective. And we're really looking forward to your feedback, your question, and your insights, especially on how well-being, on equity, on sustainability are understood in our Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much, Rachel. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nam, and thank you for sharing the reflections. I think we can only imagine the kind of discussions that you've been having as a group, because it's clearly a huge topic there. So can I just do something quickly? I mean, can we go back to the QR code for the Mentimeter? Because I can see there's only 18 people so far participating. We'd love to see more of you, because I can see 70 people online and probably at least 18 in the room. So just encourage everyone to really participate in that as well, because we do want to just hear from all of you as well as from the kind of panel. So please do go in. If we can go to the next. If we could just do that, just log into the Mentimeter at the moment and carry on this question. And I'm now going to pass over to Philip, who's going to share some reflections on this interim report. So over to you. Thank you.
Good morning. If we could please project a presentation. Great. So my presentation is Beyond GDP without leaving GDP behind, right? Actually, not necessarily contradicting anything presented by Dr. Nam, but reinforcing many aspects of it, but also perhaps provoking a little bit in terms of what areas we could examine further. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to make 4 points. Somebody controlling the, or maybe, yeah. I'm going to make 4 points. First of all, beyond GDP doesn't mean instead of GDP, and I think that point was already clearly made, but I want to explain a little bit why that is important. Second, let's also capture between GDP, and I'll explain in a minute what that means. Third, measure not only what economies produce, but also what they fail to realize. And fourth, how can we differentiate beyond GDP's output? Yeah, so that's a little pun. So let's go to the next slide. First of all, beyond GDP doesn't mean instead of GDP. So look, that's very important because look, I cover for UNDP 34 countries in Asia Pacific. I think my colleagues in ESCAP cover even more. And you see all around in this region how central the economic growth aspirations are of governments. This chart shows for several countries the aspirations embedded in national visions. And the first vertical line, the orange one, shows countries where the date is indicated that would like to become an upper middle income country by the World Bank income classification by the date indicated. And the one on the right indicates who would like to become a high income country by the date indicated. And you know, whenever I go around the region and you engage with senior policymakers, the concern right now is very much a concern about boosting economic growth, but economic growth of the right kind, yeah, job-rich economic growth. So that's a reality that we have to cope with. Next. Now, the other day we were advising the Prime Minister of Bhutan, Prime Minister Tshering Topgay, and Bhutan is actually often hailed as the country of national happiness, at least in terms of the framework, not so much in terms of the outcomes, actually. Over the last 10 years, about 10% of the Bhutanese population has left the country. I wouldn't say because of unhappiness, but at least young people are not able to find jobs. Yeah. So the Prime Minister has asked us, UNDP, come up with an economic development strategy for the next 30 years, how we can grow the economy so it becomes 10 times bigger. Yeah. So this story of economic growth, of course, Bhutan continues to focus on environmental sustainability, cultural preservation, inclusion, but quite clearly it is shifting much more into economic growth, economic development, an area they have admitted to have neglected to a large extent over the last few decades. So the pendulum is, you know, swinging. Next. It's also important, this is a very provocative chart by Land Pritchett, and anybody who knows Land Pritchett will understand why I say provocative. It shows on the horizontal axis GDP per capita, and on the vertical axis we show a component of the social progress index. That index, I will talk about it later, has many components. One of them is material well-being. And what this chart shows is the the very strong nonlinear relationship between the two variables. By the way, what does that index include? It includes aspects of health, nutrition, safety, shelter, sanitation. By the way, nothing monetary, no GDP. Yeah, so this is a broader concept of material well-being, but it focuses on the basics. So you see, for the poorer countries, a very tight positive relationship, but then it flattens out. Now, Pritchett provocatively uses this chart to make 2 points. First of all, GDP per capita is sufficient. Yeah, that's a bit provocative. Sufficient because there is no country with high levels of GDP per capita and low levels of the basics. He also says it's necessary because there's no country with high levels of the basics and very low levels of GDP per capita. Now, next slide. So the next slide makes the point that GDP per capita also correlates very well with other indicators. On the left-hand side, we see the overall social progress index, so not just a component of material well-being, but also many other components. We see a strong correlation, even though there's a dispersion around that mean. And we also know that there is a strong correlation between the Human Development Index of UNDP, which is a combination of a logarithmic relationship with GDP, which nicely incorporates, by the way, a nonlinear path, and also a measure of health and a measure of education. And that positive relationship with the SPI indicates actually also, I'm talking very loosely here, also a positive relationship with GDP per capita. Of course, the GDP per capita corresponds with the UNDP indicator. Human Development Index is a bit artificial because it's part of the indicator. And I will have a few more critical remarks to make about our own product, HDI. Next one. The third point here is the point about why GDP is not instead of GDP. Beyond GDP should not be instead of GDP. Well, actually, we do need beyond GDP because beyond GDP can complement, as the presentation earlier showed, where GDP is falling short, and it's falling short in so many areas. You know, growth alone is not enough. We need jobless growth. We don't want to have jobless growth. We don't want to have ruthless growth that disregards the interest of people. We don't want to have voiceless growth. We don't want to have rootless growth in the sense that it ignores cultural aspects. And we don't want to have futureless growth that doesn't think about future generations. So, of course, that framework in the triangle completely captures that. We want to go beyond income, beyond material well-being as well. We want equitable and inclusive, and we want sustainable. Next. Now, second point. Second point. Capture also. Can you go back? Yeah. Capture also between GDP. Now, what do I mean with between GDP? Well, go to the next slide. The paper and the presentation made a point about having to look at beyond averages. Yeah, average income within a country is not enough. We want to look at the distribution, not just the distribution in monetary dimensions, also non-monetary dimensions. But that's very important. Look at, for example, Asia Pacific. This is the data from the World Inequality Lab, and it shows on the left-hand side, on the horizontal axis, the share of the top 10%. And on the vertical axis, the share of the bottom 50%. On the left-hand side, income, and on the right-hand side, wealth. And look at this huge inequality that we see. And by the way, the arrow points at Thailand, this country, right? Thailand is the most unequal country in the whole of Asia Pacific, UNDP definition. The whole of Asia Pacific, yeah. So not including Western Asia and North Asia. You have different terminology. I still haven't learned it properly. But Thailand has, about 75% of national wealth is controlled by the top 10%. Yeah, that's really interesting. This is the data from the World Inequality Lab. Of course, there's many other measures of inequality, right? But this is just one of them. Now, my point is, next one, that in addition to the looking underneath the average of a country, let's also look underneath the average of the global result, of global GDP. Let's look at between country inequality. Even with our imperfect measure of GDP, we need to look far more at the inequalities between countries. Now, look, this shows GDP per capita using the World Bank's Atlas method. And this is a logarithmic scale. This shows actually that Asia Pacific has the largest range of per capita income levels. Singapore is at the top, and about 200 times lower is Afghanistan. And this is actually the biggest disparity in income and in that imperfect measure of GNI per capita, which isn't even PPP adjusted, has lots of issues. But the disparities are just humongous, right? Next one. Now, this is another interesting chart. Here we take the Madison data set, which is better than GNI per capita because it controls for cost of living, so a type of PPP adjustment. And on the left-hand side, you can't see it very well, but this is basically GDP per capita in the Madison international dollars. And it shows right at the bottom, the dotted line is Sub-Saharan Africa. And then you have another line that's dotted a little bit higher, that's Latin America. Yeah. And then I need to use my enlarge it a little bit. The bar between Latin America and the line between Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa is South and Southeast Asia. Above that we have Middle East and North Africa. Above that we have Eastern Europe, and above that we have East Asia. And then much further above we have Western Europe, and then we have something which is called Western offshoots. Now that may sound a little bit bizarre to you, but this comes from Madison himself. The Western offshoots are the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now look at the chart on the right, which I find fascinating. This looks at the GDP per capita of a region relative to the GDP per capita of the Western offshoots. Yeah? So consider this group of Western offshoots as sort of a frontier of sorts, and then let's compare how these other regions are performing relative to the frontier and see whether it is what we call absolute convergence. Now, what do we see here? We see convergence in a number of regions, but South Asia only started converging quite recently. Latin America was stuck at 25% for 100 years of frontier income. We call that 100 years of solitude. And Sub-Saharan Africa saw an actual regression over a shorter period after colonialization. Now, third point, next slide, please. Measure what economies produce and what they fail to realize. Next one. This is just a point, and this is, again, what the Commission is already doing, the high-level expert group is already doing. But it's really important that we start measuring the impacts of digital technology as well. There was a very nice paper in the MBR recently about the digital welfare of nations. And it's quite clear that if you measure the digital surpluses correctly, that they're large, they're growing, and they're highly unequal. UNDP will launch in 2 weeks a report where we predict the next great divergence. We believe that if AI is not going to be managed well, that there will be huge counterfactual pressure, huge pressure on between country inequality. Yeah, it could well go up, and we could see a next great divergence of per capita incomes and other dimensions between countries. Next one, please. But beyond what economies produce, beyond GDP also needs to capture what they fail to realize. And I just love this quote here by Stephen Gould. I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in the cotton fields and sweatshops. Yeah? So beyond GDP, should explore the counterfactual also, that GDP cannot see the world that could have been had barriers to opportunity been lower. Next one. Now, this matters tremendously for Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific continues to be a region of structural exclusion. We have 200 million people who are still extremely poor, a bit less, 500 million people who are still multidimensionally poor, 700 million women out of the labor force, in part because of structural constraints and restrictive gender social norms. And we have 1.3 billion people who are out of the formal sector. Yeah. So capturing exclusion in GDP will be quite critical for this region. Next one, please. My last point is about the need for the high-level export group to differentiate its own GDP, its output. Yeah? Differentiate the output of the Beyond GDP exercise. Next one. Look, it's already clear that that not a single indicator will be pursued, but a set of indicators. But what exactly are we going to do? Are we going to pursue a dashboard with cascading levels of details a la James Foster? I think that would be a great exercise where you can actually combine the benefit of aggregation with more detail in a dashboard. So that's a question, and there are trade-offs. Next slide, please. Another question is, to what extent are you going to entertain a balance between outcome and process indicators? The 2022 report on valuing GDP by the UN indicated that you would look at those three indicators that you mentioned about the three outcome areas: well-being, inclusion and sustainability, but it also highlights the importance to look at processes. Now, in your list, you already have governance, but what about going from vulnerability to resilience, innovative and ethical economies? So it would be useful to know a little bit more about that. And then next slide. What is then also important is, how is this work going to be different and build on products that already exist? Yeah? I am a big fan of the Social Progress Index. I like it more than our own HDI, even though the correlation is strong. But what the SPI offers is levers. Yeah? It goes more deeply into why the HDI might be declining. And by the way, the HDI has a monetary dimension. The SPI doesn't even have a monetary dimension. So this is already completely beyond GDP. Yeah? This is a very good beyond GDP index, and it allows you to, and by the way, we've seen a social progress regression in Asia Pacific recently, yeah, because of democratic backsliding, rights and voice. So it allows you to get into the details, what is exactly going on. Whereas with the HDI of UNDP, and I hope I'm not going to get fired for this, but we have you know, it's very rudimentary, right? It captures things. It's a poor representation of human development because it's so parsimonious, but it doesn't really tell you what is going on. Yeah, and for example, things like agency and freedom and voice isn't even part of it. Next one. And another question is, how will it differ from the well-being framework of the OECD, which is also very well done? Looks at well-being, looks at inclusion, looks at sustainability. Next one. So in a nutshell, beyond GDP without leaving GDP behind, the first point is, you know, it's well recognized that it is not the intent of the expert group to leave GDP behind. Yeah, but and as you very nicely said, there is a whole agenda of engaging with beyond GDP skeptics. Yeah? So I think it is important to make sure that the pendulum is not swinging too much away from GDP, either unintentionally or intentionally. Second, capture also between GDP. Show what happens underneath the global averages, because I tell you, what is coming ahead of us, this turbulent development landscape of existential risks, new headwinds to growth and job creation, you know, growing governance risks, all of that could well mean that inequality between countries is going to rise. Look at the discussion on AI right now. Most of it, 90% of it, is about inequality within countries. We should focus much more on the between country dimension, which can be even more significant than the within. Third, capture those digital surpluses, but also the unrealized potential that GDP cannot see. And fourth, clarify better how the proposed approach will add value and stand apart from existing frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. There's a huge amount in there, isn't there? And I'm sure lots of people have got an awful lot of questions. I can see we've got 80 people online as well, which is fantastic. We really wanted to move at this point into the interactive dialogue and to hear a lot more from everyone. So please, can I also encourage people to go to the Mentimeter, and then we can kind of move on to the next question from the global consultation. And the next question that we had there is, what does, if we go to the next one, we've done the what does progress mean to you? If we go to this, if we go on one more slide, because what are 3 things that every country should measure to understand whether it's making real progress? So we were just asking at the beginning about what does progress mean to you, perhaps as an individual. Now we really want to think about what are the 3 things that every country should measure to understand whether it's making real progress or not. We'll make it quite hard on you, I think, can't we? Because we saw from Philip's presentation and also from Dr. Nam that there's a lot of different domains being talked about, but we're asking you now to just think about what are the top 3 things you think every country should measure to understand whether or not it's actually making real progress. So I'd encourage everyone to just go online, update the, go into the Mentimeter poll, the QR code's there as well now. So you should be able to do that. Quality, so we can see what people are saying. Quality of life and human well-being, economic opportunity and inclusion, environmental sustainability and resilience. I'm not sure if that's 3 things or if that's a bit more than 3. But all of those are clearly important, aren't they? And then we also can see things around economic opportunity, job opportunity. So please do carry on, if you don't mind, to try and kind of put down the top 3 things that you think every country should measure. As we've heard a lot about these kind of what's going on and global people discussing these things, but we really do want to hear from you. Okay, quality of life, income equality and safety. And I've got some questions online as well. I can only see one of them, but I will come back to let me come back to those in just a second as well. Thank you. Trying to do Mentimeter and do a hybrid meeting is more challenging. We've got lots of people filling this in now, so this is fantastic. Thank you. So we're seeing there's a lot of similarities, aren't there? But then there are also differences, I think, aren't there, in terms of what people think would be important to measure country progress. GDP, inequality, safety, human development, the number of individuals below or near the poverty line, around the quality of life, environmental quality and sustainability. So that's clearly important as well. I'm just trying to kind of summarize as we kind of go through. There's a lot there, isn't there? Rule of law, health's come up a lot actually, hasn't it? In the kind of personal, kind of what's important as individuals, but also here what's important at the country level. Also here we see peace and security coming up again, clean air, education, improving governance. What I want to do at this stage, I'm going to, for each of these questions, I'm going to kind of come back to either Philip or Dr. Nam to get some reflections, so you don't just hear from me, but also we do have some questions as well from the audience. So let me also just quickly pose those as well. We received actually one in advance, but I might come back to that one. So we had a question to you, Dr. Nam. Maybe we can start with that one and go over to you as well to reflect on what you're seeing in this question. But to you, how will the indicator framework being developed compare with the SDG indicator framework? Will there be similarities and differences? What would be the role? What will be the roles for the two different frameworks? And will the indicators be used for creating a beyond GDP index? So if we could go over to you, Dr. Nam, on that specific question, and also if you maybe want to reflect as well on these kind of Mentimeter results so far. Thank you. I think you're on mute, Dr. Nam. Can we go? Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
Now, thank you, Rachel. Let me respond on the Mentimeter question first. It's so interesting. And I see, when I look at the answer for the question here, actually cover a wide range of what we are discussing and what the expert group discussed so far. But this is a very important question. If I have to choose just three things that every country should measure to understand real progress, they would be the first one, whether people are genuinely thriving, not just earning. Several people mentioned human well-being. So I think we should actually measure the core aspects of human well-being, such as like health, education, safety, mental well-being, whether people feel they have control and hope for their lives. So, GDP can grow while people become sicker, more stressed, more insecure, or more excluded. Actually, Philip showed very nice graphs showing that the correlation between that. But I think there are many problems we still observing. So if we want to know whether life is improving, we have to measure well-being directly. That's the first one. The second one that I would pick is that whether opportunities and outcomes are shared fairly in society. So progress will be meaningless if it is captured by only a small segment of society. And Philip showed that every country need inequality. I mean, we have to track inequalities in income, wealth. We need to track the inequality, the access to different essential services, the gender gaps, many things. So a country can only say it is making real progress when most people, not just a few, are moving forward. And my third pick is that whether today's well-being is undermining tomorrow's. This means that we need to measure the environmental sustainability in a very serious way, not just about like pollution, air pollution, but we can look at like pollution exposure, the health of the ecosystem, the depletion of natural capital, or the vulnerability of climate risks. So if a country's prosperity comes at the cost of degrading the nature of increasingly climate risks, for example, then it is not progress. It's borrowing, we can say, from the future. So in short, that three things that we need to measure well-being, equity, and sustainability. And going back to the question that comparing the SDG and the framework, the Beyond GDP framework that the expert group is developing. GDP is a set of like many, more than 200 details indicators. That's a little bit too complex for policy makers and society to track. And our Beyond GDP framework, we aim at developing around like 15 to 20 core indicators that reflect three dimensions: well-being, equity, and sustainability. So that's my my response to your question, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you also to all our participants. Can we go on to our next Mentimeter slide, please? Okay, we're thinking a bit more here, a bit more specifically. This question is, what role do technological and digital change play in how we should define progress today and moving forward? I think these should be essay questions or PhD topics, really, shouldn't they? Is what it feels a bit like, but we're asking you to do it in a word kind of relatively short way to give us some ideas on what you're thinking, because we really do want to know. So please do go ahead and answer that question. I'm also going to ask, I know kind of in the chat function, I can see a couple of questions, but we've got people in the room as well. So do please also, if there are any questions in the room, then do also let me know as well, as I don't want to ignore you, especially not as you're actually here with us. So do please, do please let us know if there's any questions here in the room. And let's think a little bit then about the role of technological and digital change. I think we've heard a little bit already, haven't we? So that's great. I'm just trying to look at the result. Oh, we're getting a few results coming in now. And I'm going to pass over to Philip to reflect on this one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's read what's coming in. Increased availability of data. That's a good point, and I'm going to speak to that. Expanding access to opportunity, greater efficiency, transparency, good point. Inclusion becoming more critical, transformative. So it's creating opportunities, but also new needs, distributional impacts, innovation, productivity. Yeah. So let's start with this maybe. How do we define happiness? For me, happiness is an equation. It's a very simple equation. Happiness is defined as reality divided by expectation. Yeah. So if you have high expectations, it's easy to disappoint them. And actually technology affects both the numerator and the denominator. Because technology affects the reality, and I'm going to talk about it in a second, but it also affects our expectations. In the era of social media, for example, we think about the Arab Spring, right? Social media played a very big role in that. So digital technologies allow for greater transparency, greater accountability, affect governance and leadership to a very large extent, but they also raise expectations through better information flow, as they rightly should, which could affect happiness in the end if the realities do not catch up with those expectations. And that's what I really like about the Beyond GDP framework, which is that subjective measures of well-being are taken into account as well. Now, in terms of the effects of technology on reality, right, we should look at technology in both the short term, the medium term, the long term, and then across the different dimensions in terms of how it affects well-being, how it affects inclusion, how it affects sustainability, and not only on the outcome variables, the three outcome variables, but also the three process variables, where we talk about innovation, we talk about governance, and we talk about resilience, because technology has truly an impact on all of it. And in fact, a positive impact and a negative impact oftentimes. And where the negative impact taken to its extreme is actually right now an existential risk, where AI is taking over, according to some, climate change as the existential risk of our times. Yeah? So, not to sound too dramatic here, but technology has so many different impacts on the reality, and that should then reflect back into how we define progress today and moving forward. Now, there are oftentimes very simplistic perspectives about technology and the impact technology have. For example, it is often said that new technologies that promote automation are cutting back opportunities for inclusive growth because the robots are taking over. But over the course of history, in the long term and in the aggregate, technology has always been a driver of prosperity. Yeah, but this is not to say that in the short term and in the medium term there cannot be very important negative effects, or that underneath the average, even in the short term and the medium term, certain socioeconomic groups or geographical areas or occupations cannot be negatively affected. Yeah? But it's important to put technology in perspective and look at its impacts over different horizons and in different dimensions. And then the sword of Damocles is actually, unfortunately, the existential risks associated with technological change right now. So,
Thank you. There's a lot in there, isn't there? So do keep on kind of looking at that. Oh, sorry, just looking at it on my screen as well, so I can see what everyone is filling in there. We're going to go on to the next question, though. We want to think as well about what other contemporary changes and challenges need to be captured in how we measure progress over the next 10 to 30 years. So again, I'd encourage everyone to take part, to kind of write this down, because as I said, we are going to kind of use the responses in an anonymized way to feed back to the panel. But I think, you know, the point of this is it is meant to be a kind of global consultation, a dialogue. So do please write down, what do you think are the contemporary changes and challenges that need to be captured in how we measure progress over the next 10 to 30 years? I think we've heard a bit just then, but maybe we can put down some more ideas. Demographic shifts. Oh, okay, getting some interesting ones there, aren't we? Okay. So I'm going to pass back to Philip again on this one. Thank you.
I'm getting all the difficult ones here. I would actually like to challenge the question a little bit. What are the contemporary changes and challenges? I would call it opportunities and challenges. I think when we talk about the long term, the changing development landscape that's coming at us, there is this tendency to depict it as a polycrisis. Yeah? Now, I don't like the term polytunity or polyopportunity, which is the opposite of that, to denote that there is opportunity in all of these disruptive trends. But I would like to adopt a beyond GDP frame of mind towards that changing development landscape. For example, demographic shifts. I actually used to work, don't tell anyone, at the IMF before, but my former colleagues from the fund continue to talk about demography in terms of a drag on productivity. Yeah, and that's not the right way to look at demography. You know, we need to adopt a beyond GDP framework to look at demography. The effect of demographic change. Look at Thailand. Yeah? In Thailand, we have very, very rapid population aging because the fertility rate, thanks to better public health policies, dropped dramatically, and it is now provoking, together with longer life expectancies, a lot of population aging. Now, population aging isn't the same as individual aging. It just means that the share of the population that is older is increasing. Now, that has implications for economic growth measured by GDP, because we worry about the average dynamism of the workforce. The workforce is, first of all, shrinking, not the workforce, well, the working age population. I'm not even talking about the workforce. Working age population is becoming smaller relative to the non-working non-working age population. So the dependency ratio is increasing. And then the mix of people is becoming older, which can affect the dynamism of an economy. And there's two issues with that. First of all, the distinction between the workforce and the working age population. Look at India, where female labor force participation is half female labor force participation in China. 30% versus 60%. So that's an inclusion story. Let's bring in the inclusion here when we talk about demography. And secondly, it's not all about GDP. For me, the challenge of demography is how aging societies can live, can remain full of vitality. The challenge is how can a society with older people continue to live with connection and with purpose. Yeah, and that is in the Beyond GDP project, the item where we talk about social capital, very important. Yeah? But actually, we can look at the changing development landscape. Almost every single of these items in the word cloud, we can give them a slightly different perspective, which, by the way, not only moves from GDP to non-GDP or beyond GDP, but also moves the discussion from crisis talk to opportunity thinking. For example, climate change is an existential risk, but a massive opportunity for innovation. Yeah? We talk about geopolitical tensions and slower globalization. Well, actually, the reality is there's a lot of remaining opportunity for the world to integrate better in so many dimensions, not just monetary dimensions. And technology, as I said before, there is a real need to look at digital welfare surpluses, in terms of the convenience of a technology, the access that it allows, and many other aspects. So that's it.
Thank you so much. And it's hard to answer these questions. It's even harder to have to do the general response as well. So thank you for being so willing to kind of,
Rachel, can I add one point?
Please do.
I agree with Philip and many good answer here. Actually, one thing that I am observing now is that the change in the social expectation in the next 10 years, I think the way that people care about like fairness, just security, mental well-being will change, and the change must be part of how we judge national progress, right? So social expectation is one factor that we need to integrate in our framework. I think so. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do another 2 questions to everyone. And then Dr. Nam, we're going to come back to you on both of these, but we'll kind of take them together. So if we can go to the next question on Mentimeter, please. So we've heard already about the different domains that the high-level expert group is looking at: health, material well-being, all of these. So can you, from this list, again, we're going to ask you to be quite ruthless on this, can you indicate which 3 you feel are particularly essential for progress? So it's health, material well-being, social capital, subjective well-being, governance, environmental quality, education. And we're doing a quick ranking. I love Mentimeter. It's great, isn't it? Because you really do see what people are thinking, don't you? Normally we don't get that opportunity to see what people are thinking. And I'm sure it's also influenced though as well, isn't it? We see what everyone else is answering, and then we also think about what we're going to put. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time. I'll let you kind of, rank your top 3. And just to let you know in advance, the next question will be, are there any domains or dimensions you believe are missing? So we're going to go on to that in a minute, but I'm just warning you about that one now, because we've kind of got an other category here at the end. So you will have that opportunity. And as you're kind of looking at this list, maybe just think about, is there something that's missing from this list? Actually, I think from the first few responses we got, governance was top. Now it's been overtaken by environmental quality. Education is very high up there, and health. I always think it's quite interesting as well. As I was reading the interim report, I was kind of reflecting on some of the questions, and I was thinking, I'm not sure I know what's important sometimes until it's kind of missing. I kind of take some of these things, I think, for granted. I take kind of, healthcare or education, safety for granted. And sometimes it's not till you're actually kind of missing those things and you don't have access to them that you realize how important they are. So I think that also really, does influence how we see these things, doesn't it? So where we see them, missing, where we don't have those opportunities, then that really highlights how important the issues are. So now we're seeing governance is dropping down, and environmental quality, material well-being, education are going up the list. Subjective well-being, I mean, that's really interesting. That's very low. Social capital is very low. Interesting. I'm not going to draw any conclusions because that's what I've got panel members to help with that. But maybe we can look at this again. We will use the answers as well as I say, to feedback. But if we can go to the next question. Are there any domains or dimensions you believe are missing? So this is your opportunity. 7, maybe we need an 8th one. So do please go ahead. I think that's how we ended up with 17 Sustainable Development Goals, wasn't it? That they thought 16 was good and we had an extra one at the end, 17. So we've got an opportunity now, though, to say what really is important and what isn't covered in those 7 dimensions: security, connectivity, between country gaps, gender, human rights. I'm going to pass over at this point as well back to you, Dr. Nam, if you want to reflect on this one and also on the previous question as well around those 7 domains. Thank you. Sorry, we can't hear you.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I do think that there are a few important dimensions that are not yet fully captured at standalone domains. For example, the first one, not many respond here, is that from my point of view, that is the natural capitals, the ecosystem condition. In our previous question, many people pick the environmental quality, right? Let's talk about environmental quality is in the well-being pillar, but the long-term environmental sustainability, the condition of ecosystem, biodiversity, natural capitals is not yet a distinct domain in the current framework. Environmental quality actually tells us about today's exposure. We are exposing to air pollution, water pollution. However, countries also need to measure about tomorrow's life support system, like biodiversity integrity, land degradation, forest condition, ecosystem health, natural capital stock. That is a little bit indirect and invisible from what we are doing and seeing now. But these are very essential for our intergenerational fairness, well-being, and they will complement the environmental quality. Human rights, something here we see human rights, gender is mentioned in our domains and framework. But I would like to focus on one other thing, that is resilience and vulnerability, that reflect the progress, as Phillips mentioned in his presentation about the outcome and the progress. Resilience and vulnerability across many regions, especially in global south, countries are facing many shocks. climate disasters, pandemics, conflict, food insecurity, economic volatility, and at the moment, resilience is mentioned only indirectly in the expert group's sustainability pillar. And it is increasingly a core dimension of progress in the 21st century. I believe that countries will want to know how vulnerable they are to shock, how quickly they can recover, how risks are distributed across different communities in their countries, and whether investment today can reduce long-term turbulence. So I think a clearer resilient or risk domain could help countries connect beyond GDP indicators with their climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and long-term planning. So that's some ideas. But actually, the human rights here in the response are reflected, and one of the underlying fundamental of the measurement of the well-being in the expert group framework. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I think we need a bit more AI on our word clouds, don't we, to group when words are almost the same, because I see human rights is there in very large letters, kind of indicating more than one person has kind of put it down, but actually human right and where is human rights are also there, which shows that actually it's probably the top thing that people domain that actually people are saying is missing. So kind of when I look at that, so that's really, really interesting. So thank you for that. I'm going to go straight on to the next question, which again, Dr. Nam, will come back to you as well on this one. This is a really easy one because it's not an essay. On this one, do you think, and this is for everyone, do you think governments should establish binding national targets for well-being and be held accountable for progress, for example, on health, education? So do you think government should establish these binding national targets? So you've got a choice between strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. So it's a very, interesting one to see what people are thinking. And I'm just looking, what should I can see from that chart, what people are saying. That's not helping me very much, but I can see it on my okay, I can see from my Mentimeter, but we've got most people saying strongly agree. Yeah, most people are saying strongly agree or agree. That's kind of most of them. The first kind of the biggest parts of the pie chart are the strongly agree and agree. But a few disagree in there, and one strongly disagrees. So that's interesting. I know there were lots of discussions when we were setting up the sustainable development goals around that and around whether or not we should actually have national targets. Some countries do have national targets, whereas others don't, or some use the global ones. But please do go ahead. Yeah, continue to answer that. And maybe I can go to you, Dr. Nam, to reflect on this one. Thank you.
It is interesting to see the responses, and many people go to the extremes. Strong agree. My answer is yes. Government should establish national targets for well-being and sustainability. Just as we set targets for GDP growth and, for example, inflation, we should also set targets for the things that truly matter here: health, education, environmental quality, and resilience too. But there are two important conditions. The first one, the targets should be nationally owned and realistic. Like a small island state, a low-income country, a large middle-income country will have very different priorities, right? And so the Beyond GDP framework should be global, but the targets must be chosen by each country based on its condition, its context. My second point is that the condition, my second condition is that the accountability should be constructed. Targets, every target should guide the budgets, strengthening the planning or support transparency. The targets should not be to punish countries who's facing climate disasters or economic shock, or they have limited capacity. So we already seen through climate targets that when countries publicly commit to measurable goals, it strengthens political focus and mobilize action. The NDC, for example, and we can apply this same logic to well-being and sustainability. Why not? Right? Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. So we could see there that it is very clear that most people actually, the vast majority of people do think governments should establish these binding national targets for well-being and be held accountable. So we'll feed that back into the global consultations. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the next question. We're getting hard. Some of these are getting hard again. What risks or barriers might limit adoption of the framework in your context? So again, I'd really encourage everyone to kind of think about that, particularly in your own context. And if you can just write down in a few words, something around what risks or barriers might limit the adoption of the framework in your context. And just so you know, we haven't got another 50 questions. We've got a couple more, but just to kind of, I'm just going to manage expectations, because I think we already heard, didn't we, that expectations are really important, particularly in terms of our own levels of happiness. So if you could just do that, that would be fantastic. And I'm just going to ask to pass back to Philip to reflect on this one, if that's okay. There's lots of people coming in. They're getting faster at responding, I've noticed. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we see already a couple of good answers coming in. I'd like to summarize it and also add a few of my own into 5 buckets. One, there will be concerns that beyond GDP is going to signal a reduced importance of GDP growth, right? Where in the minds of many people, GDP growth remains central for prosperity. Connected to that, the second one is simply institutional inertia and preference for what's familiar. People may just be lazy. They don't want to adopt a new framework, a framework that's already familiar, widely used, widely established, used for shaping policies and budgets. Even our own frameworks in the UN, like the graduation criteria for LDCs, involve GDP measures. We see political will being listed, politics, and there could be also, I always say that governance is ultimately the driver of development and the main reason why development isn't proceeding more quickly. So GDP and beyond GDP need to be useful to promote better governance and more effective leadership, but it could also expose deficiencies in those areas, and ruling elites may be worried about cross-country comparisons in multiple dimensions that expose inequalities. Limited data availability is a fourth factor that's mentioned, either on the value of digital informality, opportunity gaps, unrealized potential, which I mentioned in my presentation. It's easy to suggest that, but it will be harder to measure it. Yeah, those are the main factors I think that I wanted to mention.
Thank you. It's interesting to see, actually, there's a lot of these that are very similar, aren't there, around that kind of, you're saying, the kind of political will, the governance really cuts across so many of those, doesn't it? And again, yeah, there's a lot to think about, isn't there, with each of those? There's some interesting ones in there, just spotted as well, traditions. Interesting, yeah. That you're saying about, the people being reluctant perhaps to move away from, the way things are already being done. So thank you for those. We will, like I say, we are going to capture all of it and we are feeding it all back. So I know that we're kind of moving you through, but just to reassure you that we will use all of these and we'll feed it back to the high level expert group. So thank you for that. If we can move on to the next question, which is almost, I'm going to say almost the last one. Not quite. How do you see the Beyond GDP framework fitting with existing frameworks such as SDG monitoring or national planning? I'm just going to wait for somebody to answer this one because I put myself down as the kind of to reflect on this one. So I need to see what other people think. So please, yeah, do go ahead and maybe just write down some thoughts on how you see this new Beyond GDP framework fitting with existing frameworks. I mean, I think we've heard a little bit about that as well from what Philip was saying earlier about not replacing GDP, but about very much looking at what we can do, can't we, to kind of complement it, or getting lots of answering now, complementing existing frameworks. Although somebody says it's repetitive, replace the SDGs with post 2030. We're competing for similar resources. And another, it should enrich, should fill in the gaps. Depends on scope for national flexibility, helps to fill the gaps in SDG metrics that are numerous, uneven, or focus outputs, SDG monitoring. I mean, it is interesting to see. Obviously, the intention is not that we replace either GDP or the SDGs, but I think it was very much about the kind of the complementarity, looking perhaps at giving a slightly different focus in terms of some of the things that weren't as well captured. But I'm just trying to read as well. Improvement is still needed. I mean, I think it's fair to say as well, and I know that Dr. Nam has obviously been in all the discussions. We're just seeing the kind of 7 pages that have come out as an interim report. But I think we recognise as well, and in your slides, you've kind of got a list of work still to be done. And I think we all kind of recognise that this is very much the kind of the first part of a discussion, and it's definitely not the end of the discussion. There's a lot more to be done in terms of defining this, but I think also in terms of how we do make sure we build on what is there already, building on system of national accounts, but also building on system of environmental economic accounting as well, which we know is so important, particularly in Asia and the Pacific. And we know as well that countries have not been able to fully implement either of those frameworks, definitely not the new SNA 2025, which is hugely ambitious. So we know that that is going to be really important to support countries as well, really making sure that we actually have those kind of fundamentals in place. And that we don't kind of, leave those behind, but that we kind of build on those and perhaps go further. But we do need to kind of, build on that. Philip?
I'd like to just say one thing, which is that the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, these are frameworks, right? We have goals, we have objectives, and we have targets. The Beyond GDP framework is perhaps more a measurement exercise than a goal-setting exercise. And I would also like to remark that the monetary dimensions of development actually saw a lot more progress than the non-monetary dimensions. If you look at the MDGs, which by and large were a failure, in the sense that the progress of all but one target, MDG 1, was highly incomplete and highly heterogeneous. So MDG 1 was to halve extreme poverty rate between 1990 and 2015, and the MDG period started in 2015. That target was reached 5 years ahead of time, thanks to mainly China. But if you look at all the other dimensions of development captured by the MDGs, health, education, sanitation, we mostly missed, at least at the global level, the targets and a hugely heterogeneous performance. Now we are with the SDGs. We are having a completion, and the SDGs are a realization that we need to move much more into the non-monetary dimensions of development, because the MDGs, one could say, they were perhaps not ambitious enough on the monetary dimension, and perhaps too ambitious on the non-monetary dimension. Now we have the SDGs, which is really a very ambitious representation of the development agenda, much more so than the MDGs, much more a global compact rather than a North-South donor-recipient sort of relationship as under the MDGs. But what we see now with the SDGs, look, we are more than halfway through. We've only completed about 17% of the progress we were set out to accomplish. So why is it that we are in a perpetual cycle of missed development goal frameworks, right? My answer is governance. So, and this is where the Beyond GDP framework can come in very productively by actually what I would recommend, treating governance lexicographically, meaning it's the one and only item, make it number one item, most important. And then subservient to that, we have a number of other dimensions, because anything will be eventually a function of leaders, and not just in government, but also civil society, other part. It will all depend on governance and leadership, which is also, by the way, the realization of the 2017 growth report from the Commission on Growth and Development, also emphasized effective leadership and governance as one of the key factors. And remember, this was a growth report, a GDP report. So that's just one thing to say. So Beyond GDP is actually measurement oriented, but if we can bring out governance, we can hopefully highlight better why we are sort of stuck in a repetitive cycle of missed development goals and missed global aspirations on the development side. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think you kind of partly what you were saying as well will come into our next question, but the final kind of consultation question, it's not the final question because we have an evaluation one after this, but it is the final one from the global consultation. Do you have any recommendations for the high-level expert group on their future work? We already saw they've got quite a lot of work, and you've just given them a bit more, I think, to look at the issue of governance. So maybe if people want to reflect a bit on that as well, what recommendations would you make for that high-level expert group? And maybe as well, I'm going to slightly incorporate one of the questions from the chat, and maybe we can kind of just, I'm going to ask Philip and Dr. Nam that as well. Have we got a better title, a catchier title for Beyond GDP? I'm never very keen on trying to measure something unless we've got a good kind of, title for it. What is it we're trying to measure? So I don't know, as you reflect, maybe Dr. Nam will go to you first of all to reflect on this question, which is adding to your to-do list on recommendations for that high-level expert group. And then maybe if you have any ideas on if there's a catchy name, and I don't know if you've been discussing that in the panel or not, and then we'll come back to the room for any final thoughts on a catchy name or any kind of closing remarks before I do the evaluation question, if that's okay. So over to you, Dr. Nam. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Actually, I don't have any recommendation on catchy name. We haven't discussed too much about some other names that replace the Beyond GDP. It seems that the Beyond GDP is so popular, and it was in the Pact for the Future used by the UN. But actually, I agree with several answers here on the further recommendation, especially the strengthened data system here. You know, actually, for the high-level expert group to develop the framework and implement it efficiently, we need like strong engagement with Global South and diverse statistical capacities. I mean, here we need better data. We need but how to do that? Because the framework must be universal, right? And countries have very different capacities and priorities. I am, this is my opinions, not reflecting the group thinking and final output, but I'm thinking that we might need to continue our deep consultation with developing countries like this, and we might develop like a 3-tier system that, for example, the first tier indicators that all countries can report, and the second one for countries with a strengthening system, very good data system. And the third one is for a long-term data and agenda for everyone. So I think that can be practically feasible for everyone. And within our expert group, we aim to develop indicators and framework. But the second task that we are debating is that whether we develop a guidance on implementation, how governments can use these indicators, because countries have asked not only what to measure, but also how to integrate these measurement, the indicators into like their planning, their evaluation, their budgeting, and their also communication too. So do we need practical guidance? I think yes. That is from my own opinion. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those reflections. Before we kind of draw this to a close and do an evaluation question, if it's okay, I'll pass back to Philip for any good names on the Beyond GDP, but also any final reflections from you as well.
Yeah, I actually find Beyond GDP quite catchy. But going a little bit deeper, like the valued GDP, VGDP, and equitable GDP, EGDP, and which creates a bit of E as in, internet. That's a bit confusing perhaps, or like an EV, an electrical GDP. And then we have sustainable GDP, but I quite like these concepts. They're quite catchy. I mean, of course, I don't know yet what will be in it, but I think the challenge is that you need ideally some indices. Yeah, I understand you want to have a dashboard. You want to have the granularity, but dashboards are complex and they are Christmas trees. Yeah, so the beauty of GDP is it's so simple. Yeah? And unfortunately, GDP is a simplism. It's an oversimplification. And some institutions use it non-stop as if there's nothing else that matters. Now, but you also need simple indicators. You need something to aggregate it all. And why? Because you want to create envy. Policymakers like, they might not like, but they respond well to being compared, subnationally, nationally, globally. And I always say the way we can have an impact at UNDP is through our indices. Also, the World Bank, it's formerly the Doing Business indicator, have been a huge force for improvement, even though there were some governance issues. Now they have a different system, and oftentimes much more impact than writing a 300-page report. Yeah? So having a single data point can transform a society. So we need to have something simple and index. I do think that supply will create its own demand. Yeah. So even if, I mean, the challenge is to activate the latent demand for this. But just like when you try to promote private sector initiative, you don't just improve the rules and regulations, you also do demonstrative investments. So you have a proof of concept. So we need proofs of concepts. We need champions. We need places like if you can convince the IMF to stop talking about GDP growth, then I will be convinced that your project is a success. Yeah, and the World Bank. Yeah, so start with those two, but also involve all the multilateral development. Let us all, be a champion of this approach and start talking differently to each other. We also need anchors, like the LDC graduation criteria. So connect this concept to something that matters in terms of reallocating financing. So it's not just an academic exercise, but it's something that has consequences if you don't listen to it. And then finally, develop standards around it and capacity building, just like the system of national accounts, which has been a great success, but it's been underpinned by continuous investment in statistical capacities and capacities, human resources in statistical commissions and technical assistance. So those are a couple of the comments.
Thank you so much. And thank you for really kind of bringing it down as well to kind of what do we actually need to do with it being so practical as well. You gave us a very clear KPI, I think, as well, didn't you? Getting the IMF not to speak about economic growth. Was that the summary? But I think, what you were doing there is really kind of understanding these broader issues. If we can go to the final question that was just an evaluation question, but let me also say, at this point, let me just say a little bit about the process and what happens next. So from today, this is one part of a global consultation process, which is happening during November. So really very much from the 5th of November to the 30th of November. The information is all available on the website, which we'll show in a minute. The interim report is available. There's a link there as well on the website to the global consultation survey, which has exactly the same questions we've been using today, plus a couple more. So please do also feel free to go into that and to kind of put your responses today into that. But we will collate, as I said, this information and feed it back to the Secretariat. That global consultation process finishes on the 30th of November. And then I think the high-level expert group has got a lot of work over Christmas to then pull it all together into the next report. The first report that we were talking about today was the interim report. My understanding of the process is that the final kind of report is due around the end of this year, beginning of next year. And then what happens when they've got the high level panel, you have that kind of the next report is that then the real process begins, the consultation with member states, with everyone. So that's when they kind of start a much more formal process to look at that. And the intention, as I understand it, is then that the kind of results of that will then feed into UN General Assembly next year, so September 2026. It's a pretty tight timeline. In fact, it's a very tight timeline, particularly in terms of kind of getting feedback from the kind of consultations. So I would just encourage everyone to use the opportunity, because I say it's between now and the end of the month. Do pass on that as well to other people, to your kind of different communities that you're engaged with, to everyone. This is not limited to government, international agencies. This is open to communities, individuals, families, friends, anyone can kind of really contribute to this global consultation. And I think this really kind of demonstrates we're trying to have an inclusive process, that we really do hear from people as to what does really matter. If I can just go to the thank you for sharing as well the evaluation question. We appreciate that. I just added a code at the end which gives you the link to the papers and the global consultation. There's also an email address, beyondgdp@un.org, so anyone can send them whatever questions, comments, feedback you want to, and we will feedback on behalf of the kind of consultation we've had today. But as we said, and as we were hearing, this is very much the kind of the very early stages of a process, which will continue as we kind of refine the framework. But then even as we get an agreed framework, then the real hard work begins, which is in terms of actually using that framework. So we know that that work will be continuing for the months and years ahead. But I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for your participation. Thank you so much, Dr. Nam, for being with us today virtually. Sorry you couldn't be here in person. Thank you to all the participants as well, obviously in the room, online. And thank you, Philip, as well, for kind of being here in the room, as well as kind of being a kind of panel member. We really appreciate all the reflections. So thank you to everyone.